Welcome back to The Contrarian, everybody. Welcome to 2023. This is the first video of the year. I'm glad to be back after a little while of being off, but today I'll be talking about a recent tweet Michael Burry put out, which is very dense, contains a lot of Burry's thoughts and maybe ideas going forward for this coming year, things that he believes are very likely, and a lot of these are pretty significant from where we are right now, getting to things Michael Burry talks about, such as potentially deflation. As crazy as that might sound right now, I don't know if that's quite that far off actually, but I'll dive into Burry's tweet first and then get into what he's really saying from there. So Michael Burry can be followed on Twitter at Michael J. Burry, but this tweet is very dense. He says, "Inflation peaked, but it is not the last peak of this cycle. We are likely to see CPI lower, possibly negative, in second half of 2023. And the US in recession by any definition. The Fed will cut and government will stimulate, and we will have another inflation spike. It's not hard." So these are a lot of claims that Michael Burry has basically packed into one tweet. Firstly, he's saying that inflation has peaked. In his opinion, it's the peak in inflation, the worst of the inflationary pressures that we've been seeing in the last year and a half are behind us, in Michael Burry's opinion. Secondly, Burry is saying that this is not the end of inflation being a problem. It will be problematic again, even though it's currently going in the rearview mirror. Third, Burry is saying that CPI will go much lower, potentially even negative in the second half of this year. So that would be deflationary. In my mind, this is probably the most significant of Burry's claims in this tweet. He also says the US will at that point be in a severe recession by any definition of what that could be. And then he says the Fed will cut rates, the government will stimulate, more stimulus, more quantitative easing all over again. So he's saying that that'll then occur. And then he's saying that, again, inflation will come back with potentially even more severe consequences. That, it's not going to be anything, in the past. It's not going to be a problem that was solved from this current cycle. So what could be leading Michael Burry to believe all of this? There's basically one underlying premise of his, and that is that the economy is very, very weak right now, and that it's going to get a lot weaker in the coming months, and definitely in this current year that we just started. So the theme behind his summary is definitely economic weakness. He's probably looked a lot at just the data that's coming in, anywhere from real estate basically becoming a very stagnant market, to inventories becoming very bloated, as a result prices coming down dramatically in consumer goods, even luxury goods being hit a lot in their prices, just as people are going from the kind of extreme spending of all of the stimulus money that was put out into the system in the last couple of years, and toward now all of that's gone away, and even the Fed's beginning to pull liquidity out of the system. And basically, it leads to a very severe whipsaw kind of effect where you go from higher levels of inflation, scarcity everywhere, to where prices are going up dramatically to combat that. All of a sudden, you have the bullwhip effect of inventories becoming bloated as consumers are buying much, much less, and then prices coming down. So, firstly, the government effectively tried to solve a supply chain crisis with just more liquidity, putting more liquidity and cash into the system. That's not really solving the underlying problem. And Burry's saying that as a result of that, the inflation was the end result of that, but as a result of all of this spending, you effectively have this everything bubble that is beginning to deflate now, as well as asset prices deflating. But once you go to the other side of that and having to re-stimulate quantitative easing again, whatever the Fed might do this time to try to stimulate an even more dead economy, because nothing was structurally solved. You still have supply chain issues, you still have demographic issues, baby boomers are retiring. So you have structural issues that were not solved, but suddenly you have the economy going into a severe recession, so you have to stimulate again. So on the back of that, you then lead on to Michael Burry's kind of last point, that inflation will come back again as a result of the stimulus that the government will effectively be forced to do. I don't think it's in Burry's likely scenario that the federal government just allows things to go into a disaster mode, into a financial depression. It's likely the case, in his mind almost, it has to be the case that the Federal Reserve cuts rates, begins to do quantitative easing again, more stimulus, and then of course the government puts more fiscal stimulus out in whatever way that might be. So there's just so much in this tweet that Michael Burry recently put out on the 1st of January this year. It's taken me a couple of days to get into it, but it is really interesting to just see where he thinks the direction of the economy is going this coming year. There's a lot of other people who would agree with him, maybe not as, maybe aggressively as what Burry is saying in terms of actually the potential of deflation happening this year in CPI, but all of that being said, I'd really like to know what all of you think out there. Is inflation coming down dramatically as Burry is saying? Could that actually turn into deflation this year? If so, does the Fed and the government stimulate a way, trying to solve the problem again? Let me know what you all think down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you all think about this, and hope to see you all again at some point.